It wasn't enough that our routine was already difficult. The house has been adapted for wheelchairs, the car is specific. Even the dog has learned to open the door with his muzzle because sometimes the rush is so great that even the doorbell can't cope. We've always been discreet. We lived there for almost 3 years without getting involved in anything. We didn't even go to HOA meetings, and not because we didn't want to, but because from the beginning they made it very clear that houses with exterior modifications compromise the look of the community. It all started one morning when my wife had to go out alone. The adapted car was in the space in front of our house, as usual. With the wheelchair sticker on the window, everything was fine. She was only going to the pharmacy for half an hour. When she came back, the car was gone. Gone. Evaporated. All it had was a tire mark on the asphalt and a gossipy neighbor standing on the porch, looking like she knew too much and said too little. The woman, who must have been earning a commission from the mischief, had called the tow truck. She said that an unauthorized vehicle was disturbing the visual harmony of the street. That's right, disturbing the harmony. A car with a disabled sticker, parked in front of her house, on a street with no traffic, was a threat to the symmetry of her universe. My wife went back inside crying, her hand shaking, as if she had committed a crime. It ate me up inside. You think you've seen it all until someone messes with someone who can't run. Literally. Her feeling of helplessness, that what else are they going to take from me? Look, left me with hatred in my blood. I went into the garage and tried to breathe, but it was too late. My mind was made up. It wasn't going to be cheap, not least because the towed car couldn't just be towed away. It was adapted. It had an electronic lifting system and a custom-made engine. If they messed it up, it could ruin everything. And they did. When I managed to locate the vehicle at the depot, it looked like it had been thrown off a cliff. Scratches, the rear-view mirror hanging off, and the side elevator stuck. The specialist garage said the repair would cost over $5,000. And when I explained why, the mechanic looked at me with a face that was a mixture of pity and fury. I went home with my soul burning. The woman from the HOA, who, by the way, only took over the presidency because the former president moved away to escape an extortion charge, was proud. She came walking down the block with a clipboard in her hand and a smile that made you want to install a catapult in the garden. And then, like every authoritarian in a condominium, came the classic. We're just following the rules. Rules that only serve to screw those who already live on the edge. She said that my wife should have said she wasn't a member of the association, and that non-member cars don't have privileges. Privilege, according to her, was to stop in front of her own house. At this rate, soon you won't be able to breathe HOA air until you pay a fee. I didn't sleep that night. My head was boiling. My wife was silent, her eyes on the ceiling, and it was in that silence, at that exact moment, that she muttered, "I'm going to sue these people." And I swear, by everything, I've never loved this woman as much as I did at that moment. Her face looked like she wasn't going to let up. She'd been through too much in her life to let half a dozen bored locals define her worth. The next morning, she called her old college classmate, a lawyer with an enviable track record of taking down gatekeepers. Meanwhile, I organized the documents. I took a copy of the deed, the car's registration, the garage's report, the prints from the HOA group where the woman celebrated the reinforcement of traffic rules. Yes, she did. There was even a firecracker emoji and laughter. The neighbors started whispering. One or two came up to us, saying that they thought it was an exaggeration, that they didn't agree with the tow truck, but they couldn't interfere. Of course, it's always like that. Nobody wants conflict, but they love to watch the fight from the window. It's a good thing that some people took a stand. One couple offered my wife a lift for a few days. Another left a note on our door. "This will go far, and we're on your side." That's when we realized the woman had poked a hornet's nest, and now the whole neighborhood would hear the buzz. But that was just the introduction. We were still going to go to court, expose every dirty detail of the association, show the abuses, the humiliations, the persecution disguised as neighborhood management. The woman thought she was going to win by noise. She forgot that if you've kept silent for a long time, when you speak, it makes you shudder. The notice was sent with gusto. Drafted with every word sharp as a razor, the lawsuit landed in the HOA's inbox like a silent bomb. Quietly, but with enough impact to make the walls of her makeshift office shake. The woman with the clipboard, who until then walked around the neighborhood as if she were a condominium colonel, simply disappeared. No posts in the group, no formal complaints about tall grass or non-standard paint. It was the silence of someone who had been legally beaten and was still trying to understand who had turned off the lights. The lawsuit was straightforward. Moral damages, discrimination, abuse of power, and violation of the Accessibility Act, all supported by evidence, reports, and records. There was a photo of the car with the wheelchair user sticker. There was a video of the conversation with the depot employee saying that he had not been advised of any changes to the vehicle. There was even a message from the woman herself saying that the HOA doesn't have to bow to exceptions. She thought she could control the neighborhood with threats and an indignant face, but she quickly discovered that an ugly face doesn't support a defense in court. My wife's lawyer, a gentleman with white hair, a rumpled blazer, and irony dripping from his voice, read the petition like someone reciting poetry. He ended by saying that the only thing out of the ordinary in this case was the humanity of the defendant. The judge didn't even hide her look of disgust. The HOA, of course, tried to fight back. They sent another document saying that the presidency acted within the internal protocols for maintaining local urban order. They even put up a chart with parking spaces and a flow chart of community coexistence. It looked like college work done the night before with the help of the internet. Pathetic. The most curious thing, they had no formal authorization to tow anything. The members' parking space rule was never voted on. It was an invention in her head, reinforced by half a dozen puppets on the board. The woman gave herself a power that didn't exist and applied it as if she were queen of the neighborhood. She forgot that even a queen has to be accountable, especially when she steps on people who can't even get out of their cars without help. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the neighborhood was a real festival of disguised frowns. Some people made a point of walking past our house more slowly, peeking through the window, as if they could see legal documents through the walls. Others pretended that nothing had happened, but all it took was one stumble from the woman for another whisper to go up in the group. She deserves it. She crossed the line. It's time someone put her in her place. The biggest impact was on the association's subsequent meetings. With each new assembly, fewer people showed up. The half-dozen who used to chorus her speeches gradually drifted away, like someone who realizes the boat is sinking and starts looking for a buoy. And the president? She tried to pretend to be normal. She sat on the edge of the table, adjusted her papers, and gave a crooked smile. But the firm posture of before now looked more like a cracked shield. Her authority had become a memory. She tried one last trick. She spread the word that the lawsuit was an exaggeration, that it was all just a tantrum by someone who wants attention. She said that my wife was using her disability as a shield. She had the courage to say this in a group where half the people knew our story, knew about the hardships, the adaptations, what it was like to wake up every day with the pain of someone who can't run or dodge injustice. But her speech didn't generate applause, only silence. A thick, uncomfortable silence, because there, even those who had always been on her side understood that the woman had crossed the line. It was no longer just about garden rules or fence height. It was about dignity. In the midst of all this, my wife stood her ground, not out of pride, but because she had already swallowed too much out of politeness. She didn't speak loudly. She didn't bang on the table. She didn't make a fuss. But when she walked, or rather, when she slid into her chair with her posture erect and her eyes fixed, you could sense that there was no more room for cowardice, and that scared me more than any scream. As the lawyers exchanged pleas and the hearing drew closer, the woman tried to reverse the narrative. She sent an open letter to the neighborhood saying that she was sorry if anyone felt offended, but that her intention was only to maintain the high standards of the neighborhood. It was the kind of apology that sounds more like an accusation in disguise, the kind of apology that reminds you of what the fight was about. What was interesting was what came next. Residents started talking, one by one. They came to our house to tell us stories they had never shared before. People who had a tree uprooted without warning. A dog reported for barking outside the permitted hours. A child banned from riding a bicycle because it scratched the visual pattern of the sidewalks. The woman wasn't just cruel to us. She was cruel to everyone. Only now, someone had the courage to stand up to her. We had lit a fire that many people had wanted to heat up for years. And the fuel, well, she provided it herself, in excess. The day of the hearing arrived with that weird atmosphere when you know something important is going to happen, but nobody wants to admit it. The sky was overcast, the air humid, as if the universe was holding its breath along with us. The courtroom wasn't big, but every step towards the door felt like a silent parade. Not of vanity, but of resistance. My wife was dressed as always, simple, elegant, without exaggeration. But there was something in her eyes that screamed. It wasn't anger, it wasn't pain, it was an unshakable certainty, as if she was there not just for herself, but for everyone who has ever been crushed by people who think they're bigger than the law because they hold a clipboard. The woman from the HOA, on the other hand, arrived wearing a white blazer and looking like a fancy funeral. She was accompanied by two lawyers, both younger than she could tolerate. One of them was carrying a huge briefcase full of papers, as if volume could compensate for a lack of argument. Her expression was that of someone who still believed in her own theatrics. She sat up straight, fixed the buttons on her coat, and ran her hand through her hair, with that rehearsed gesture of someone who thinks she's in control of the narrative. The judge entered, and the mood changed. There was no clowning around. The kind of judge who looks everyone in the eye as if she were doing a moral X-ray. When she called the case, she didn't even need a bell. The whole courtroom was silent out of respect or fear. My wife's lawyer was straightforward. No frills. He presented the images, the documents, the messages. He explained point by point how the HOA's action violated the Accessibility Act, how the car was removed without legal justification, and how the physical and emotional damage caused exceeded any tolerable margin of error. And then came the detail that nobody expected. The garage where the car was left had cameras, and on them you could see the tow truck driver talking to someone on the phone, describing the car before he even arrived at the scene. It was her. The woman with the clipboard. The video had no audio, but the number used for the call was in the operator's records. And guess whose line it was? The courtroom looked like a play in which the protagonist had lost the script. The woman's eyes widened. Her lips tightened, and she tried to whisper to the lawyer, but he just shook his head. She knew the damage had already been done. When the judge asked her if she would like to speak, she stood up with that air of false modesty and began to speak in a soft voice, trying to turn the tables on her emotionally. She said that her intention had never been to harm anyone, that she had always looked after the well-being of the community, and that perhaps she had committed an excess of zeal, but that this did not make her a criminal. She even tried to use the card of female solidarity, saying that she was also a woman, that she knew what it was like to be underestimated. That's when the judge interrupted, without even changing the tone of her voice. Nobody is saying that you are a criminal, but everything indicates that you used your position to discriminate, intimidate, and harm someone with a disability. That has another name. The woman stood still, her face drained of color, as if she had been slapped in an unexpected way. She returned to her seat a little shakily. This time, she didn't fix her hair. The sentence didn't come out that day, but the message was clear. When the hearing was over, some people who had been watching came up to greet my wife. people we didn't even know. One man said he'd been through something similar with the same woman. One girl said she'd had flowers plucked from her garden because they weren't up to standard. With each new story, the image of the HOA president became a caricature of everything the neighborhood wanted to forget. We walked home in silence, but it was good silence, the kind that allows you to take a deep breath after years of suffocation. The street was quieter than usual. No one appeared at the windows. No one walked past slowly. It was as if everyone was waiting for the outcome, holding their collective breath. The following week, the unexpected happened. The HOA called an extraordinary meeting. The title of the email was Change of Direction and Conduct Review. The woman no longer signed the notices. She no longer attended meetings. The position of president was declared vacant for an indefinite period. What's more, they made room for Democratic candidacies and an external audit of the actions of the previous management. Of course, she didn't show up. She disappeared. She really did. Her car didn't leave the garage for days. Afterwards, all anyone heard was that she had asked to leave for personal reasons. Some swear she's moved out. Others say she's living with a daughter far away, far enough away not to hear her name whispered in the corridors of the condominium. My wife? She's back to her routine, with one difference. Now, when she goes out with her car, the neighbors pass by. Some wave. Others leave notes with words of support, admiration, even apologies for not having spoken before. 2 weeks after the hearing, the notice arrived in the mail. The sentence was ready. The envelope was thick, heavy, with the court seal right in the middle, as if the court wanted everyone to know how heavy it was. My wife opened it slowly, without haste, like someone who opens a letter that no longer needs answers, just confirmation. She read in silence. Her eyes traveled through the words calmly, as if they wanted to absorb every comma. At the end of the reading, she just put the page down on the table and smiled. A discreet, almost sad smile. But it was the kind of smile that brings relief. The kind that comes after carrying the world on your back for too long. The decision was clear, objective, with no room for lame excuses. The judge recognized the abuse of authority, the violation of the Accessibility Act, the moral and material damage, and even made a point of pointing out the systematic contempt on the part of the HOA's board against residents considered out of line. Most striking was when he described the case as a clear example of how micropowers, when fueled by vanity and prejudice, become tools of exclusion. The compensation was generous, enough to cover the repair of the car, the costs of the lawsuit, and much more. But the money was just a detail next to the feeling of seeing someone who had spent her life dictating rules for the aesthetics of the neighborhood finally being remembered as a symbol of public shame. Her name was removed from the HOA's files, literally, torn out, replaced with previous management, voided for misconduct. The neighborhood changed. It wasn't magic, but it changed. Fine notices stopped appearing on doors. Meetings were attended by people who had previously been ignored. A gardener was elected to the new board, the same one who had already been fined 3 times for planting daisies outside the fence line. The street became more colorful. The houses were more diverse. Even the walls seemed less oppressive. A week after the sentence, my wife received a phone call. It was a reporter from the local newspaper. She said she had heard about the case and wanted to hear from her. My wife hesitated. She never liked the stage, but she accepted. She gave the interview as calmly as she lives. She told us what had happened without beating about the bush, without drama. She talked about how she felt invaded, diminished, and how it wasn't just about a towed car, it was about how many times we swallow abuse to keep it down. The article came out with a photo of her sitting on her balcony, drinking coffee. The caption? Woman faces HOA abuse and wins in court. I just wanted the right to exist in my space. After the publication, messages started coming in from other cities, other states, people telling similar stories, thanking her for speaking out, saying that now they had the courage to react too. One lady from the other side of the country wrote a letter by hand, in old handwriting and on perfumed stationery. It said, "I've been humiliated for years for not walking like everyone else. I was always told not to complain. Seeing your courage made me feel that I still have a voice. Thank you." It moved her. What began as a moment of despair became something much bigger than the neighborhood, than the HOA, than any court. It became a spark that ignited others. Meanwhile, the woman who caused it all has completely disappeared. Not a shadow of her in the city. Rumor had it that she was living with her sister in a gated community, the kind where everyone looks like they've stepped out of a furniture catalog. Some said she tried to run for another association position in another neighborhood, but was rejected. Fame ran faster than she did. The most curious thing was that, even though she won, my wife never spoke of revenge. She never used her wife's name in vain. She never celebrated in public. She didn't send hints. She didn't make posts. She didn't try to humiliate. She just lived. More lightly, with more room to breathe. A month later, we had a small celebration. Just us and a few friends who stayed by our side the whole time. We bought a simple cake, with no theme, but with a little sign that said, "End of the soap opera." We laughed, toasted with soft drinks, and let the evening end with the sound of laughter, mixed with the sound of her chair sliding smoothly across the floor. As it should have been from the start. No obstacles, no invisible barriers, no people thinking they can decide where someone with wheels can or can't stop. On the balcony, almost dawn, she looked at me and said a phrase that has stuck in my memory. The hardest part wasn't proving them wrong. It was remembering that it wasn't my fault for being who I am. And in that instant, in that comfortable silence that only true justice brings, I understood the weight of everything she carried without complaint. It wasn't about the cement, the car, or the neighborhood. It was about the right to exist without asking permission. And if you like this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.